On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, there's a war at sea in the Caribbean, the Red Sea, and the Strait of Hormuz. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So we have conflict on the world's oceans in a way that I didn't think was going to be possible. When I was a kid growing up, I can remember distinctly the image of Great Britain sending an expedition down the Atlantic to go fight in the Falklands. I still have a copy of this Newsweek magazine with the Empire Strikes Back. I was enamored as a young kid with the idea of a British task force heading off to sea. I still have Admiral Woodward's signed copy of his autobiography. It's a great book if you've never read his 100 Days. It's a fantastic one. But then I found myself in the middle of a naval war early in my sailing career during the first Persian Gulf War. In the middle of that fight on board the hospital ship Comfort. But I got to say, since the end of the Cold War, even after the end of the global war on terror, didn't quite expect to be seeing fighting on the world's oceans the way we're seeing it now. In the Caribbean, in the Red Sea, in the Black Sea, and up in the Strait of Hormuz. And I think I want to talk about this a little bit and break down where we are with each of these conflicts. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. So conflicts at sea have a bad habit of escalating. And one of the reasons I think it happens is because they're out of sight and mind, and therefore they're not in the consciousness of most people. In the case of the United States, which I'm an American, I'm a historian, for those of you who don't know, I was a former merchant mariner turned historian, it is maritime events that lead to the United States getting into two world wars. I give you Rodney Carlisle's Sovereignty at Sea, U.S. merchant ships, and America's entry into World War I. For those of you who don't know, it is the second initiation of unrestricted submarine warfare and the sinking of 10 American ships and the loss of 64 merchant mariners that leads to the U.S. declaration of war against Germany on April 6th of 1917. Yeah, I know all about the Zimmerman telegram. I've read Barbara Tuchman's book too. But it's not really Mexico that triggers this because, number one, the U.S. has invaded Mexico, and there's very little chance of Mexico invading the United States. The issue there is an assault on the sovereignty of the United States. And even in World War II, that is the case. The United States kind of gets into, not kind of, it does get into World War II over shipping and trade. The U.S. initiates an economic embargo against Japan for its movement against European colonies in Southeast Asia. They invade French Indochina. There's a fear they may move into Dutch Indochina. They're also been in a protracted 4-year war with China, so the U.S. initiates an embargo against them, and Japan is going to move forward. In the meantime, the U.S. is supporting the British and subsequently the Soviets, and to do that, the U.S. is providing escort of convoys across the United States and gets itself into an undeclared naval war. If you want a great book on this, Hitler's U-Boat War, this is the first of 2 volumes in Clay Blair's series on this. He talks about the war off of Britain for the first half of this book, and then he talks about the war off America. But it's in that first to second half of this book that he talks about how the United States gets into a de facto undeclared naval war. Matter of fact, Ribbentrop, in his declaration of a war against the United States, specifically notes the actions of 3 American destroyers, the Kearney, the Greer, and the Reuben James. And so shipping has a weird tendency to escalate into larger conflicts. So let's talk about the 3 conflicts that are being waged across the world's oceans today. So the first area is down in the Caribbean. This is Operation Southern Spear and being conducted by the U.S. Southern Command. Now, one of the features of the operation down in this region has been attacks and strikes against suspected narco-terrorist boats in the region. This is video released by U.S. Southern Command on June 21st showing the 66th strike against a vessel. This took place out in the Eastern Pacific. According to U.S. Southern Command, 2 were killed on board and 6 survivors were recovered. Now, the Just Security website has a timeline of these boat strikes. According to them, 66 strikes, 215 killed, including 17 missing and presumed dead, and a total of 9 known survivors. So what makes these strikes very controversial, obviously, is that the United States is alleging that these are narco-terrorist boats, but haven't provided much intelligence or information on the background of that. Now, what makes this controversial is the U.S. Coast Guard is conducting similar stops of vessels, but they're using helicopters and sniper teams to shoot out the motors of the boats and have the vessels stop and then conduct boarding operations. This video shows an operation like that back in 2025. Here you can see the shooting out of the motor and then the boarding. Now, this does provide risk for the crews associated in conducting the boarding operations. Now, that was part of Operation Pacific Viper. In that specific case, December of 2025, out in the Eastern Pacific, netted 20,000 pounds of cocaine. The other operation that took place had to deal with the overthrow of Maduro and the seizing of 10 tankers by the U.S. Navy. Now, these 10 tankers were seized for a variety of reasons. The most significant was these ships were operating as stateless vessels. Many of these ships were not properly registered. The U.S. seized them from the skipper at the very beginning to the very last one, the Bertha, which was seized out in the Indian Ocean. And this really initiated U.S. kind of blockade operations. What we saw was a kind of run-up for what the U.S. would conduct later on during the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Aden in the subsequent part after the ceasefire between the United States, Israel, and Iran. The second area we're looking at here is up in the Black Sea. This story by Gary Howard over at Sea Trade Maritime. Ukraine hits 21 Russian ships within 72 hours. Analysts warn of Russian retaliation on Ukrainian-linked ships after wave of drone attacks on tankers and bulkers target bridges and accommodation blocks. This video was released by the Ukrainian government. According to the story at Sea Trade Maritime, Ukraine's drone forces have struck 21 Russian flag vessels in the Sea of Azov in the space of 72 hours, according to Ukraine's Unmanned System Forces commander, Robert Madyav. Madyav announced that 9 Russian tankers were hit by unmanned aerial vehicles overnight on 8 July, adding to 10 attacks reported on 7 July and 2 on 6 July. The ships were all operating in the Sea of Azov and struck as part of Ukraine's attempt to choke off fuel supplies in Russian-occupied Crimea. One ferry was hit along with 1 bulker and 19 tankers. Even before the latest 9 attacks were reported, Ambry, which is a shipping analysis source, said the dozen attacks to 7 July represented the highest number of vessels targeted within a 48-hour period. Quote, the Sea of Azov strikes this week are more than another development in the Black Sea conflict. They represent a significant escalation in the Ukraine maritime security threat and a genuine shift in how this war is being fought at sea. Ambry assesses a realistic possibility of reciprocal Russian actions against Ukrainian-linked shipping in the coming days. Now, they named some of the vessels that were struck during these attacks. They're all small tankers ranging in size between 5,000 and 7,000 deadweight tons. The Venus 3, the Sonar 1, Sonar 17, Teti, the Alexev Saravov, the Penelope, and the Clemine, along with a dredge. Many of the unidentified vessels are subject to international sanctions from jurisdictions including Ukraine, EU, and the U.S., or operating for companies subject to similar sanctions, predominantly for the transport of Russian oil. Now, what's most concerning here is that these videos are showing a preference for targeting the bridges and the accommodation areas. This is the after structure on these vessels. Ambry said the change in approach mirrors actions taken by the Russians and increase the risk for seafarers. The security intelligence firm warned that Russian retaliation typically takes 2 to 5 days in such scenarios. Quote, vessels awaiting transit at the Sulina anchorage, including those bound for Ukrainian Danube or Black Sea seaports, face a heightened threat of direct kinetic attack by Russian forces in the coming days. So this video is I have to say, is really disturbing. The level of attacks here orchestrated against shipping is significant. So a quick view of marine traffic. Where these attacks are taking place is right here. This is the Sea of Azov. So give you a little background here. And we haven't talked about the Russians, Ukraine in the Black Sea here in a while. So one of the things that the Russians are trying to do is seize this eastern half of Ukraine down, and they already have seized Crimea back in 2014. One of the things they did in February of 2022 was invade overland here to connect Crimea by a land bridge. And so that you didn't have to just rely on the Kerch Strait bridge, a bridge across the Kerch Strait here that has been the subject of attack. One of the reasons I think that this was significant, and I noted it at the time it happened, is the Russians wanted to secure this northern shore of the Sea of Azov because shipping comes out of the Don River here, proceeds through the center part of the Sea of Azov, through the Kerch Strait, out into the Black Sea. For those of you who don't know, Russia has a massive inland waterway system. You can see it here. This is the closed Caspian Sea. This is the link over here, the Volga River, that connects over to the Don and takes you out into the Sea of Azov. And internally, that river system actually takes you all the way up to Moscow, over to Leningrad. Russia has this massive, extensive waterway internal system. And as long as Ukraine controlled the northern shore of the Sea of Azov, Mariupol, Berdansk, they had the ability to choke off the Russians. What we're seeing now is an escalation in fighting. Last year, we saw Ukrainian attacks against shipping coming from the Turkish Straits, heading over to Russian ports. Specifically, they were targeting vessels that were stateless vessels so that they didn't get in trouble with nationalities and registries. But now what we're seeing is attacks against these small coastal vessels, largely tankers that are bringing oil and fuel up from Baku in the Caspian Sea region, along the river here, out and doing ship-to-ship transfers down here. There used to be a huge, massive anchorage here where ships were doing ship-to-ship transfers. They have subsequently moved down off the coast of the Black Sea, trying to get out of range of the Ukrainians. But those ships came under attack last year. This series of attacks is significant. The fear now is that the Russians will strike ships in the ports here in Ukraine, Odessa, and along the coast here. You don't see them because their AIS is off, but there's a massive anchorage here down off the Danube. This is Romanian territory. The ships sit here, go dark on AIS, run up along the coast to Odessa, load, and then come back out, and then out through the strait. This has the absolute potential of spinning out of control. While we're focused on the Strait of Hormuz, we need to be looking at the Black Sea, because I think what we're going to see over the next couple of days is systematic attacks by the Russians against shipping coming out of Ukraine. So that takes us over to the Strait of Hormuz. In my week 18 recap, the past week's recap, I noted something. What we're seeing in the Strait of Hormuz is no clear resolution yet. Yes, we're seeing an uptick. Yes, we're seeing more traffic go through. Yes, everything's looking positive. However, it's only going to take one thing to derail this issue, because the underlying issue here is that if you spook commercial shipping, they will freeze in place. They're like those goats that run around and all of a sudden they lock in place. That's global shipping. It's like a goat. It's like a fainting goat. They're going to sit there, lock up, and then fall over. That's what they have. Not because they're scared, because that is their tactic for dealing with a predator. Unfortunately, what we haven't seen, and again, not a lot of discussion about this, is what the United States and other nations are doing to counter the Iranian threat in the Strait of Hormuz. We're getting that there's minesweeping going on. We're getting that there is these convoys coming out that we're seeing on that map by Kepler. What we're not hearing is what the U.S. is doing directly to push through the Strait of Hormuz and open it back up. We have not heard about U.S. destroyers making a presence felt in the Strait of Hormuz or in the Persian Gulf. So I left it very much like all it's going to take is something to cause global shipping to kind of lock up. And I used the fainting goat analogy, which I've gotten a little bit of flack about, but that's fine. I can take it. But lo and behold, what we saw was the Iranians strike. This story by Mike Schuller over G Captain. A third commercial tanker has come under attack near the Strait of Hormuz, with the UK Maritime Trade Operations reporting Tuesday that a vessel was struck by an uncrewed aerial vehicle, the latest in a string of attacks that has prompted the Joint Maritime Information Center to raise its security assessment for the waterway to severe. This is the first of the three reports by the UK MTO, 6 July 2119 UTC. A tanker is reported being hit by an unknown projectile on the port side, causing a fire while traveling southbound. Report 81 on 7 July. UK MTO has received a report of an incident involving a tanker transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The tanker was struck by an unidentified projectile and is believed to have structural damage. The third report, number 82, a tanker was struck by an unknown, uncrewed aerial vehicle and has sustained minor structural damage, no casualties or environmental impact. So Lloyd's List reported the U.S. has revoked the Iran sanctions waiver following these attacks. General License 10 has been revoked and superseded by General License 10-1. New license provides a wind-down period through July 16th, but does not permit any new transactions for purchases or loadings after July 7th. The move comes after Iran attacked 3 ships in less than 24 hours. U.S. Central Command says it has launched strikes against Iran in response to the attacks. This is CENTCOM imagery that was released showing attacks on small IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps vessels. And when I say small, I mean small. These are their speedboats. You can see right there. Those are a nest of 3 fairly small speedboats with outboard engines that were struck. These are the type of boats that come out and harass shipping. While they are not a threat to naval vessels, they are a threat to commercial vessels. Take you over to the Strait of Hormuz on marine traffic. Hats off to the crew at Marine Traffic. They've included a new feature here that I want to show you. We're going to show you the traffic separation scheme, and as you'll see here, they have included this traffic separation scheme that Iran is using. So this is the Iran safe passage. This is the inbound lane. This is the outbound. This is the international traffic separation scheme. This is where we believe the mines to be located. And then here is the Oman safe passage. What you will note here is we don't see any vessels using the Oman channel right now. We do have some vessels using the Iranian channel. Now, the IMO is meeting for their 137th meeting in London, and we get this report from Mike Schuller over at G Captain. The security situation in the Strait of Hormuz deteriorated sharply on Wednesday after the U.S. launched a new wave of strikes against Iranian military targets in response to attacks on commercial shipping, prompting the IMO to urge the industry to avoid transiting the waterway if crew safety cannot be assured. CENTCOM struck more than 80 targets across Iran on Tuesday, including air defense, command and control, coastal radar sites, anti-ship missile capabilities, and more than 60 IRGC small boats. The strike comes after Iran attacked 3 merchant vessels transiting the strait: the Marshall Island flag tanker El Rikat, the Saudi Arabian flag tanker Waden, and the Liberian flagged Cyprus Prosperity. CENTCOM described the attacks as a clear and dangerous violation of the ceasefire. CENTCOM continued, the U.S. forces remain postured and prepared to hold Iran accountable when the agreement is not adhered to or obeyed. The Trump administration on Tuesday revoked temporary sanction waiver for Iran general oil exports. Now, the Iranian response to this is that the U.S. has violated the agreement. Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Baghir Ghalib, who had taken the lead in Iran's negotiation with Washington, accused the United States of repeatedly breaching the memorandum through renewed military strikes, reimposed oil sanctions, interference with Iranian management of the Strait of Hormuz, attacks on southern Iran, and continued support for Israeli operations in Lebanon. He said, quote, "The era of bullying and extortion is over. It leads nowhere. We don't fold." So what Iran is saying is that Section 4 and 5 of the Memorandum of Understanding specifically gives Iran oversight of the strait. So Section 4, the United States will begin the removal of its naval blockade, which it did, and any disturbances or impediments against the Islamic Republic of Iran, talking about those strikes. and will fully end the naval blockade within 30 days. During this period, the traffic of vessels will be in proportion to the number of pre-war traffic being restored by the Islamic Republic of Iran. It also goes on that the U.S. will further undertake to remove its forces from the proximity of the Islamic Republic of Iran within 30 days. Section 5. Upon the signing of the MOU, Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. The traffic of commercial vessels will immediately start, and considering the need for removing the technical and military obstacles and demining by the Islamic Republic of Iran will be initiated within 30 days. Iran will dialogue with Oman to define the future administration and maritime services of the Strait. All right, so what Iran is saying is, listen, Section 5 specifically says that Iran has been given the authority to regulate the Strait of Hormuz for 60 days. And what they're saying is that southern lane being used by the United States is not part of that regulation. The Iranians had set up the PGSA, Persian Gulf Strait Authority, and if ships are not using that, they are in violation. The problem is the U.S. sanctioned the PGSA. So any ship, any company that does business with the PGSA, even submitting forms for them, could potentially come under sanctions. And this all goes to the issue that the MOU sucks. I mean, I don't know how to say it any more than that. It's a terrible agreement. It doesn't really delineate true control. And based on the wording here, it does kind of appear that the U.S. gave Iran oversight of the Strait of Hormuz for at least 60 days, by which point there would be negotiations and then discussions. Iran is also fighting the fact that the U.S. is clearing mines in the Strait, and there's a story out saying that there are more mines in the Strait. So this is just leading to a situation where we're seeing a deterioration. Matter of fact, the Joint Maritime Information Center, which had the Strait of Hormuz at critical during the height of the crisis, lowered it all the way down to moderate, and now it's back up severe. And we're just hoping it doesn't go beyond this to critical or, heaven's sake, poop. Because I have a feeling that this could go poop very fast. And that's the fear. Once you unleash the dogs of war, to quote Shakespeare, it's very hard to get them back on the leash. And the U.S. needs to be negotiating with Iran over the ownership and control of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran thinks they control the Strait of Hormuz. I have talked about this repeatedly based on law, international law, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and precedent of law. Iran doesn't. They don't. They may have territorial water for half of the Strait of Hormuz. The other half is in Oman, but under the right of transit passage, they cannot block passage through the strait. The problem here is that the onus of a ceasefire, of all of this, is really just a facade. And it's been a facade for quite a while. And one of the things I fear is that we're finding ourselves in this undeclared naval war, and an undeclared naval war can escalate. I give you one other reading book for you right here. Steve Phillips, A Poison Chalice, the U.S. Navy in the Persian Gulf, 1987 to 1988. I'm trying to get Steve on to talk about this. What Steven talks about is that tanker war and the U.S. operation to escort tankers and then fight Iran in 87, 88 actually is what leads the U.S. to the Persian Gulf War of 1990 to 91. It leads to American presence in the Middle East, which leads to the creation of Al-Qaeda, which leads to the strikes on the United States and the global war on terror and the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the destabilizing of Iraq, the buildup of Iran in that period of time, the Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the mess we find ourselves in the middle of 2026. Whew. That's a lot, but that's what war at sea can do, and it's one of the reasons I get nervous, because I have this history in the back of my head. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you hit that super thanks button down below, or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Once again, we are on all the social media platforms, typically at Mercogliano S, my last name and my first initial. I'm not Greek, I'm Italian, so it's Mercogliano, but it's Mercogliano S. Also, follow us on Patreon, on LinkedIn, on Spotify. We're on all those kind of platforms if you want. Until our next episode, Sal, sign off.